Tonight I want to talk about the most important law enforcement agency that you may not have heard of. That is the U.S. Marshals Service. Now, if you know the Marshals Service, you may know them from this moment in history. That's James Meredith, one of the first students to integrate the University of Mississippi. This was not long after the Supreme Court case in Brown v. Board of Education, which outlawed segregation in schools. And there he is being escorted by, yes, U.S. Marshals, as well as top Justice Department officials. Or you might know the Marshals Service from this.
Listen up, ladies and gentlemen. Our fugitive has been on the run for 90 minutes. Average foot speed over uneven ground, barring injury, is 4 miles an hour. That gives us a radius of 6 miles.
That's Tommy Lee Jones trying to arrest Harrison Ford, because one of the chief responsibilities of the Marshals Service is to go after fugitives. So let's talk about this agency that was established by Congress in 1789. There have been some illustrious occupants of the office of the U.S. Marshal, including Frederick Douglass, appointed U.S. Marshal by President Rutherford B. Hayes. But the agency has essentially these responsibilities. They enforce court orders. They, as I mentioned, go after fugitives. They help protect the courthouses and the judges, a responsibility of increasing importance these days. But here is why this agency is particularly important in this moment. And it is because this agency serves two masters that may be in complete conflict. That is, the Marshals Service is a bureau of the Justice Department. So in that sense, the U.S. Marshal and the 94 marshals around the country answer to the Attorney General, Pam Bondi. But at the same time, and by statute, the responsibility of the marshals is predominantly to enforce court orders. So they answer to the courts. What happens when the responsibility to the courts conflicts with the responsibility to the Justice Department? What happens when a president ignores a court order? What does the marshal do? Well, I asked Donald Trump's nominee for U.S. Marshal exactly that question in a hearing today. This was his answer.
Senator, the U.S. Marshal Service, myself, if I'm confirmed, every deputy that has ever sworn oath to the Marshal Service will enforce all lawful orders issued by a federal court.
So if a judge holds administration in contempt and issues an order to either seize someone from the administration or to effectuate the service of legal process on that person, you will follow that court order.
Senator, if it's a lawful order, absolutely, we will enforce all lawful orders issued by a federal court.
Now, this, of course, is not really hypothetical. This conflict between the court order and the administration and the position it will put the marshals in, it's not hypothetical because in the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, for example, the Supreme Court ordered that the president facilitate the return of this man wrongfully deported to El Salvador, and the president has refused to do it. He is already flouting a court order. There already is, in a related case, this order to show cause why the administration is not in contempt. If the judge in these cases determines that the administration is in contempt and it orders some step to be taken, it may order the marshal to enforce that contempt. Now, what does the marshal do in those circumstances? Well, we don't know yet. So that conflict is coming. It is coming. And maybe not just that conflict, because one of the things we have seen is that Donald Trump is taking aim at judges. Donald Trump's words and his actions are threatening the lives of judges. We have seen the threats against members of the bench escalate over the last several years since Donald Trump entered the political stage. Threats to district judges and Court of Appeals judges, threats to U.S. Supreme Court judges. We have also seen Donald Trump remove security from people he doesn't like. So we've seen him remove security from John Bolton, the National Security Advisor in the Trump administration. You've seen him remove security from Mike Pompeo, Donald Trump's previous Secretary of State, and others as well. Not because the threats to these former Trump officials have gone down, not because there's any change in the security threats to these individuals, but because Donald Trump doesn't like them. Donald Trump has a partisan grudge against them, and therefore Donald Trump is willing to gamble their lives by doing away with their security detail. Is it hard to imagine a circumstance where a judge rules against Donald Trump and Donald Trump orders the marshals to stop providing protection to that judge? It is sadly all too real a potentiality. So again, this will put the Marshals Service in the crosshairs. But there are other potential abuses of the Marshals Service that we need to be concerned about. There were public reports, for example, that Elon Musk and Doge sought to and perhaps did abuse the Marshals Service in a couple ways. First, you'll remember the Doge bros showing up at USAID and trying to get in, including trying to get into a sensitive classified Schiff on the facility. And at first they were barred entry, as indeed they should have been. And it is reported that Elon Musk called in the Marshals Service to help him essentially get into that building, get into that secure space in violation of law. So the Marshals Service may have already been abused in that manner. It is also reported that Marshals Service agents, U.S. Marshals, went into courthouses to try to pressure, at the urging of Doge, to try to pressure judges to more speedily dismiss cases against January 6th defendants after the president issued his pardons. That, again, would be a terrible abuse of the Marshals Service. The president is also seeking to use the Marshals for completely unrelated purposes, including as a vehicle of the Border Patrol, essentially bringing in that agency to do Border Patrol work. Ironically, in the case of James Meredith and the integration of the University of Mississippi, Border Patrol agents were brought in and deputized to help the Marshals in integrating that university. So it is very possible that this agency that most Americans have never heard of could be at the center of the next constitutional crisis, either because they're called upon to enforce a court order or because they're called upon to refuse to provide security. And what happens then is uncharted territory. Now, the courts are not without some powers even in the absence of the Marshals Service. They probably can't enforce a criminal contempt, which you really need the Justice Department to enforce. But there's a vehicle called civil contempt that allows them to fine people who are in contempt. It allows them to forfeit assets of people who are in contempt. Those authorities and others provided by the federal rules of procedure allow the courts to deputize people to enforce their court orders. So the courts may not be completely without power, but nevertheless, this may be the next venue for a true constitutional crisis. And if that crisis comes, we can only hope and pray that the occupant of that office, the next U.S. Marshal, is someone who possesses the qualities of character and grit. A marshal kind of like this one.
Mr. Dogburn?
What is it?
I'd like to talk to you a minute.
What is it?
They tell me you're a man with true grit.